This is Blaine Smith with Team Red, White, and Blue, and you're listening to the Veteran Resource Podcast.
Welcome to Veteran Resource Podcast, where you will meet nonprofit organizations focused on improving the lives of veterans and their family members. Here is your host, Jeremy Paris.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 8 of the Veteran Resource Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Paris, and today's guest is Aaron Scheinberg with The Mission Continues. I worked with Aaron on one of his projects in D.C. where we helped to revitalize a school in one of the poorest communities in the country. I was there on behalf of the Veteran Artist Program, and I was able to bring some of the best mural artists from Baltimore and D.C. to do some amazing work on the outside and the inside of the school. Aaron is a great guy, and he does a really good job of taking you inside The Mission Continues during this interview. But before we get into that, it's time to go over a few reviews that came in. The podcast is now up to 45 reviews. That's really cool, and I couldn't thank you guys enough. Our first review comes from Jody, who says, "Love this. My grandfather, dad, uncle, and 2 brothers are veterans, and I know this podcast would have been incredibly helpful to them." And Chris says, "Thank you for your continued service. Such an awesome need that needs to be filled. The host is an incredible storyteller and delivers helpful information to our nation's finest." And Nick says, "Awesome. Such a great premise and valuable resource for veterans. Awesome stuff." Thank you so much, Jody, Chris, and Nick. And if you have not left a review yet, I invite you to go to veteranpodcast.com/iTunes and leave a review. It'll only take a minute, and it's going to help to get the stats bumped up, which is going to hopefully get this podcast out to more veterans that are searching for it. All right, let's get back to Aaron. Since joining The Mission Continues in 2012, Aaron has worked as the Director of Strategy and Research, heading program evaluation and internal consulting efforts while helping lead the Service Platoons initiative. Aaron serves as the Northeast Executive Director. Aaron was born and raised in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, to a family of public servants. Aaron's parents were both K-12 public educators, and his brother Joshua was a nuclear missile combat officer in the Air Force. Aaron attended the United States Military Academy at West Point, graduating with a degree in Arabic and Systems Engineering while earning a commission as a United States Army officer. During his military career, Aaron was an M1A2 SEP tank commander and platoon leader with the 4th Infantry Division, a civil affairs officer, and an Army science and technology analyst at Fort Monroe, Virginia. He deployed to the Triangle of Death, Iraq in 2005, leading infantry and tank platoons and earning the Bronze Star Medal during combat operations. After his military service, Aaron completed a dual degree graduate program at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and Columbia Business School, earning both an MPA in International Development and an MBA. During his time at the Kennedy School, Aaron led the Armed Forces Committee and the student government as president. Aaron continued his international development work through independent consulting projects in Nicaragua, Morocco, Tanzania, and Qatar. Aaron was selected as an Education Pioneer Fellow for New York City in 2011 and joined Wireless Generation, an innovative education technology company, helping to build public school districts' data capacity through the development of a dashboard software program in conjunction with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Before joining The Mission Continues, Aaron was a senior consultant for Deloitte Consulting LLP and built industry knowledge through projects with Fortune 500 companies in the aerospace and defense and retail sectors. Aaron and his wife Natasha live in Harlem, New York City. We have a lot to go over today, so I'm going to jump right into the interview. Welcome, Aaron, to the Veteran Resource Podcast.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. The first few interviews that I've been doing are people that I've had personal contact with and have had the opportunity to work with, and this is no exception.
Yeah, it makes it extra special, and I'm really glad you're doing this podcast, and thanks for inviting me and showing your listeners the mission continues.
Thank you. I appreciate you being on. Yours is a great organization, and I think the world needs to know about it.
I agree.
All right, Aaron, I want to find out more about your background, but before we do, I wanted you to kind of give us a brief description of what the Mission Continues is.
Yeah, of course. The Mission Continues, we're a national veterans nonprofit, and we believe that veterans aren't done serving our country once we get out of the military. So we empower veterans who are adjusting to life after the military to find purpose through civic action. We redeploy veterans on new missions in our communities so that the legacy of our generation of veterans will be one of leadership and service.
It's really great. I can't wait to talk more about that. But before we do, I want to get into your background a little bit. Tell me about what you were like growing up. Were there any parallels to what you're doing now at the Mission Continues?
A little bit. I mean, just like anyone who's had different influences in our life, I've had influences from my parents and grandparents. At an early age, I knew what it meant to serve. My grandfather served in World War II. He was hit with a shrapnel round in the mountains of France, just near Germany, and luckily survived because of a glasses case that was in his breast pocket.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty crazy. My dad actually had that glasses case, which saved him. Back then, the cases where you kept your glasses were made out of this really thick metal, and he just was lucky enough to be wearing it. He was a combat engineer, and that saved his life. He went on to go into Germany with his unit. There's a unit out of New York. He grew up on the Lower East Side, and they obviously were going through some pretty crazy times. They liberated concentration camps, and then he came home and he continued to serve his community as a researcher for the USDA, and he founded one of the local Cub Scouts groups in Maryland. And so, from the time I was growing up, I always looked at in the military as something that was, honorable thing to do. And then I saw what my grandfather did after he came home, where he continued to serve. And I know that played a big part in why both of my parents, and my mom's side of the family, my grandfather served during the Korean War, wanted to continue their service. My parents were both public educators. They were teachers. My father worked in special education, and my mother is an earth science teacher in New Jersey. And I always knew that public service was kind of what you did. We're here on the earth to help others and also to make sure our country's stronger. And so from an early age, I wanted to continue to serve myself, continue that legacy. And West Point wasn't necessarily the route I knew I was going to take. But once I got through high school and I was a track athlete, I was asked to come visit on an invitation from the college track coach at West Point.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I fell in love with everything that the United States Military Academy had to offer and what its values were, and just the cool stuff you got to do in the Army. And this was when I was 16 years old, and I knew then that was my path. It was going to be through my path of service was going to be through the Army, and I guess that's my early story of service.
And you went in as an officer right out of school. What was your job in the military?
So after West Point, I did 4 years. This is full 4-year school, and you get a bachelor's of science, but you're also really studying engineering. And I was a language major. I studied Arabic and Spanish and German and linguistics. But my first job was actually as a football coach in the Army.
Really?
Yeah. Every year they select graduate assistants to represent the graduating class, and you help as a coach and an assistant coach for any of the 8 to 10 different varsity squads, which we call core squads at West Point. And I was lucky enough to be selected to be a coach for the sprint football team, which is a lightweight football team, which it's only in some of the Ivy League schools and the academies. You have to be under 175 pounds, but it's one of the best leagues of football I think you'll ever see. The speed is unmatched, and the passion is also, yeah. And I was a running back and did pretty well in my time, but I would think I was an even better coach. And the year where I was a coach right out after the Army, we won the national championship, and our running backs had the most yards gained throughout the league.
Nice.
This was right as the Iraq War was kicking off. So it was an interesting time. It was impossible to tell how the war would proceed, and what it seemed like it would almost be over pretty quickly. It seemed like the Afghanistan war almost felt like it was winding down, at least externally.
Right.
And Iraq war, we were approaching kind of mission accomplished by the time I was done coaching. And I went out and was an armor officer, and right after I was a football coach at the end of the 6-7 month time frame as a grad assistant, and went off and started my career as a combat guy.
And you deployed?
Yeah, I deployed in 05, 05-07, OIF 05-07 to Iraq. I was with the 4th Infantry Division. Originally started out with 167 Armor as a tank commander, as a platoon leader for a platoon that literally just came back from their first deployment. So they were part of the 2004 first initial invasion into Iraq, which was interesting, taking over a platoon of combat-hardened soldiers, and you're this rookie lieutenant who just came back from coaching football. I had a lot of work to do to win them over, and I had a lot to learn.
I bet.
And eventually, of course, I did learn the trade. I learned how to be a great tank commander. We went through a lot of training at Fort Hood, Fort Irwin out in California. And as soon as I got really good with our platoon and, being tankers over in Iraq, we were actually cross-attached to 2-8 infantry. And within a matter of months, instead of being a tank platoon leader, I became an infantry platoon leader, provisional infantry platoon leader. And for most of the deployment to Iraq, I was on the ground with Bravo Company 2-8 Infantry, 2nd Brigade, as an infantry platoon leader for an area just south of Baghdad, which some call the Triangle of Death. Some call the southern tip of the Sunni Triangle, but the cities where we were Haswa, Skandaria, Mahmudiyah, that area.
When did you get out of the military?
So I got out in 2008. So after Iraq, I had a couple, odds and ends jobs in the military. I filled in as the S3, the operations officer for 2-8 Infantry, when all the majors were sent out to their next assignment. So that was interesting. Part of my job was to set up the memorial services for the soldiers that we lost over in Iraq, and I was working with the families of, Gold Star families, the ones that we lost, and that was extremely difficult. But I'm glad that I was able to do that. We put on memorial service. We also helped train the First Cavalry Division to deploy, because they were kind of replacing us over in Iraq. And then I got news that I would be sent to Fort Monroe, Virginia, to work in an office which I had no clue existed, Army Science and Technology at TRADOC, which is the Training and Doctrine Command. And, 1 minute I'm in the middle of Iraq doing raids and, working on building local infrastructure with imams and local town council leaders. And the next minute I'm analyzing research that the Army can use for better training. So it was a huge change, but really a great experience. And at the time at Fort Monroe, I was applying to graduate schools, and I got into my top schools of Columbia and Harvard, and I knew that it was time for me to get out. And that was 2008. And I was en route to do a dual degree at Columbia Business School and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was exciting, of course, to be accepted into this. I put a lot of work into the applications, and I wanted to go to the best schools possible, and I wanted, to take my military experience and put it to work to do even greater good back here at home.
Did you have any idea what you were going to be doing after you finished up your degree program?
I think yes and no. I think you could probably tell for the fact that I went to two different schools that are very different, business school and the Kennedy School, which is government and policy. I wasn't 100% sure what I'd do when I get out. I think that's fine. When I applied to schools, what I said was I was going to do consulting and learn really all there is, all that I could learn at the time about business, which I ended up doing. I did management consulting. But I also knew that the reason why I went to West Point to begin with was to serve a greater cause, to serve our country, to be a leader for our communities. And so that was, for me, something that was going to happen at some point. I just didn't know when. But I knew that right after graduate school, I wanted to get into business. I wanted to gain that experience. I wanted to see that side of kind of life and the world. What
led you to The Mission Continues? Did you seek them out, or did that just kind of come to you?
It really was. I'm very lucky. It didn't necessarily come to me, but I guess it did. It was in a LinkedIn email. I wasn't looking to leave. I was at top management consulting firm. I was traveling around the country, and I was working on, really important issues for CEOs and CFOs of top companies. And it was cool, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't necessarily giving me that same sense of accomplishment and purpose and feeling like I'm making a difference in the world like I felt in the Army or over in Iraq as a, platoon leader, later on as a civil affairs officer. And I never quit anything in my life. And most military people probably attest to that. You don't quit. So I wasn't going to quit consulting. And even when other veterans organizations were out there that I was aware of, I never predicted that I'd be working for a veterans organization. When the idea of a veterans organization in my mind, it just at the time back in 2008, it seemed so, antiquated. A lot of the organizations, I won't name any names, but they just felt like they were out of touch. They weren't innovative. They were for my grandfather's generation or, maybe the Vietnam generation. I didn't feel like I'd necessarily fit into them or want to work with them. And then all of a sudden I get an email through LinkedIn from a headhunting firm that helps to place leadership into nonprofits. And they were sourcing for The Mission Continues, this organization I never heard of at the time. But then I looked into it, and I looked at the founder, Eric Greitens, and the president, Spencer Kimpton, and their backgrounds, which are extremely impressive. I went out and flew to St. Louis to meet with them, and here in New York, we talked about what their vision was. And what made The Mission Continues so unique and different was that instead of looking at veterans as victims or veterans needing a handout, like, oh, poor veteran, we got to help them. And we got to get your benefits, and we've got to, give you stuff. They were flipping it on its head and saying, no, look at all the things that we did over in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is a resource that we need to put into action here at home. And at the same time, we can help veterans reintegrate, because what they're missing the most is their sense of purpose and connection to a greater good. And I felt the same thing on my end where I was. So I felt like, oh my God, I can help veterans here. I can grow an organization that's entrepreneurial and doing something new. And I can do it in our community. I can do nation building here at home. I didn't talk about this, but towards the end of my deployment, I was a civil affairs officer, and I did, help lead 90 different civil service projects, from building schools to building roads and hospitals, and spent $10 million basically worth of taxpayer money on really essential services all over the Baghuz province of Iraq. And mine is just one story. Imagine just all the veterans and the experience that they get going through that. It's a waste if we're not putting it to work in the community. So I saw all of that, and I said, wow, this is something I need to be a part of. And I left management consulting firm quote unquote early before most people do, which is after 3 years before you become like a manager, a senior manager. And I never looked back. It was one of the best decisions I could have made for myself. Mission Continues has helped me find my sense of purpose or re-find it. And I've also helped thousands of veterans at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the founder, Eric Greitens, and I was reading a little bit about him, and it said that he visited with the wounded Marines at Bethesda Naval Hospital. He was a Navy SEAL, and when he got out, he came back, and he was meeting with the wounded Marines, and he was talking to them all, and he said that the one thing that was the same with all of them was that they had this deep desire to continue serving their country. I've seen this so many times talking to veterans that are out, and that seems to be the one thing that they feel that they're missing when they're doing, another job. Is I'm missing that feeling like I'm doing something important, something that matters, helping other people. And I thought that was right in line with what you were saying, why you decided to do it.
Well, first of all, it goes back to the group that we're dealing with here, the group of veterans that we are. This is the first time in our nation's history where we have, well, maybe it's since the Revolutionary War, although they had conscripts back then, right?
Right.
It wasn't all volunteer. Let's say this is the first time in our nation's history where we've got just an all volunteer force. And that means that's a big deal. That means something. That means everyone who joined the military did so out of, a sense of purpose, out of a sense of wanting to do something bigger for our country, be part of something important to make a difference in the world. And not all of us can stay in the military for 20 years, 20 plus years, retired for, a number of different reasons. And, when we get out, maybe even some people don't realize that that's what they're going to be missing, that there's other ways to find that sense of purpose. But there's not that many paths towards it. You can go through government, and you can go become a teacher, and you can start your own nonprofit. There are ways to do it, don't get me wrong. But there was no structured path. In the military, we knew you want to become an E5, you kind of knew how you get there.
Right.
It was a defined path. And what we were missing when we came out of the military was a defined path towards continued service. Whether it's because you're wounded and you can't continue to serve in the military, or it's because you're going home and everyone's telling you, oh, you got to get a job in banking or consulting, and you're just following what seems to be the normal path. I would love for the normal path for a veteran to be continued service.
Right.
And I think that would not only benefit the veterans, all of us, but benefit our country.
Well, I think you're absolutely right that when I got out in 2000. And when I got out, I didn't know that there were these organizations like the Mission Continues and a lot of these other great veteran service organizations out there. And if I did, I think that that's the direction that I would have had immediately. The thought when you get out, you're going through the transition briefings and everything. And the thought is, okay, the first thing you need to do when you get out is try to find a job. Like you need something that's going to pay your bills. And I think that is steering people in the wrong direction, because paying bills, you're going to pay bills no matter what job you end up going into. But you get that job where you're paying bills. If you're not passionate about it, if it's not what's driving you, then you're going to end up kind of getting depressed and you're missing out on a lot of things. And I think that is one of the reasons that a lot of these veteran suicides are happening, is I think that people get out and they feel like they lost the purpose that they had before. They lost that sense of camaraderie, that service, and that path that you mentioned. And I love seeing organizations like yours provide that path to veterans.
Yeah. So, a few things there. Well, the suicide is a little bit more complicated. There's a lot of things baked into it. Maybe sense of purpose is a part of it. I think we're still figuring out through research that's coming out. And by the way, back in 2001, when you got out, there weren't organizations like the Mission Continues or some of the new ones like Team Rubicon or Team Red, White, and Blue. This all kind of happened after 2008.
That's true.
Because we saw that there's this gap. Maybe it is because of the all-volunteer force. But one other thing that you talked about is this difference between this initial kind of off-ramp and what veterans are steered towards. Getting a job, get your education, make sure your benefits, housing, healthcare, all taken care of. Like that's just the basics. That's what we call the transition. The transition is the most basic stuff. If you want to look at the hierarchy of needs, that's kind of at the bottom. And yes, we got to work on that. And there's those that don't even make it past those first few steps, and those are the veterans that are the most at need. And there are a lot of organizations that address those at the most need. But then once you get past that, the vast majority of veterans, talking millions of veterans, who maybe have a job, maybe use the GI Bill, like they're kind of good, right, as on paper. But what they're missing is a full, what we call reintegration. And reintegration is deeper and it's longer lasting. And reintegration includes things like your connection to the community. Do you feel like you're part of the city which you live in? Because all of us are coming back, maybe the same city or maybe a different one, and it doesn't feel the same. You don't feel like you're connected. Or do you have strong connections with your family members? Do you have strong connections with a social network where you live? Do you feel a sense of purpose? Do you have an identity? All those things aren't being addressed overall across the country with the veterans organizations that are there. And we feel like that's some of the things that lead to a longer lasting, healthier life. And so the Mission Continues is working on not transition, but we're working on reintegration. We're working on the deeper issues that affect us over a lifetime. And so the programs that we have address connection to the community. They address your social network. They address your sense of purpose and your identity. And we advocate for a shift of mindset. We've published research through Washington University and with the Center for a New American Security, a think tank in DC, basically trying to persuade veterans organizations to move away from, not just the initial kind of storming the beach, but what comes after that.
I read an article in USA Today that was talking about Rachel Gutierrez, who is a platoon leader with the Mission Continues. And one of the quotes that I pulled out of there that really stopped me in my tracks was a quote where she said, "We are portrayed as this damaged generation of veterans. We're not liabilities to this nation, we're assets." And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Rachel Gutierrez is awesome. I love Rachel. She's a great example of a veteran who has moved through the transition and then really solidified her reintegration, and is now helping other veterans through their reintegration. She was a fellow with the Mission Continues. She, like many of us when she came home, suffered from PTSD, suffered from some of the reintegration challenges, and really finding out what she's going to do with her life next. And luckily, she came across the Mission Continues and did a fellowship in Phoenix, and she was working with the local Veterans Affairs, became really an entrepreneur and known to be a mover and a shaker amongst the veterans networks and the community itself in Phoenix, and did so well that she was selected by the Mission Continues to be one of the first Service Platoon leaders, which is another program of ours that brings together teams of veterans all over the country to do service and civic action on a regular basis. And she's just doing an amazing job. She's on her second year as a Service Platoon leader. She's worked in Phoenix with her platoon to combat homelessness as part of the reason why Phoenix was the first city in the country that eradicated chronic homelessness for veterans, because of the platoon, because of her work with organizations like 100,000 Homes. Rachel has been kind of a part of history. So
That's great.
yeah, it is pretty amazing. And so, yeah, what she said there is exactly right. We work with an organization called Got Your Six, and they just published a public opinion poll looking at the perception of veterans. It was an extension of a survey and research that the Mission Continues put out with Bad Robot and Paramount a couple years ago. And it found that the American public, on average, views veterans in this weird dichotomous nature. On one hand, they view veterans as heroes, and they put us up on this pedestal. And really, it's a pedestal that is like too far to reach for many, and too far to really understand. And on the other hand, they view us as damaged, as lacking, or at least going through such trauma that it's hard for us to overcome. So this idea of this damaged hero is really out there, and we're not sure exactly what to do with it. But what most people see as a veteran is either you're really messed up or you're an amazing hero, and none of those really come close to what the reality is. And what the reality is that we've had incredible experiences. Yes, we've gone through trauma, but we have so much to offer through those experiences as leaders, as civic servants, that instead of viewing us as, oh, poor veteran, we need to help you, you should be coming to veterans and saying, we need your help. What can we do to get you in leadership roles so we can utilize all the skills that you learned over in Iraq and Afghanistan? And we've got to change that perception. So what we do at the Mission Continues is do that through action and through evidence, example. We want tens of thousands of veterans getting out there, showing their leadership skills through civic action and leadership. And Rachel is an example of someone who's doing that.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
You mentioned some of the projects that she's involved with, and that's great because I really wanted to get into talking a little bit more about projects right now. One in particular, I'm holding in my hand a coin that you put in my hand yourself at one of the events, one of the projects that we were working on. And I also got a T-shirt, which I've worn and washed so many times that it shrank on me, and I still wear it because two reasons. One is that I feel very honored to have this Mission Continues shirt.
Oh,
and
wow.
Two, it's a little tight, so I look like I work out a lot more than I do. So win-win.
We'll have to get you another one too, so you can fit it when you do get huge as you're working out.
Nice.
No, that was an amazing project that we did, and yeah, thank you for being a part of it. It would not have been as special without your work, without the Veterans Artist Program and the local artists that we had come down from Baltimore. But yeah, so part of what we do, we've got to get veterans out there doing service, as I mentioned, to change the perception of veterans, and also, of course, to help veterans reintegrate and to show veterans that have gotten out that there's a pathway towards continued service. So we have, any given day, right now we've got 45 platoons, service platoons, across the country in basically every major city now. So if you're a veteran and you're thinking that you're missing your sense of purpose, like many of us are, in fact, there was a study done about 4 or 5 years ago. It's roughly like 90% or maybe even more want to continue to serve. They just don't know exactly how to. So if you're one of those 90%, you would look into where a service platoon is, and you would find that basically on a monthly basis, there is a major service project going on. And our platoons focus on a number of different community issues. Just like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, we do a needs assessment. We figure out what's important for our community, and then we find out the best ways that veterans can attack it, the best ways that veterans can work with the community to actually make it better, because we're all about that action. So there's some examples like homelessness that I mentioned in Phoenix. Here in New York, we have multiple platoons now. Some focus on youth mentorship and education. Others focus on neighborhood beautification through the arts. And we've got a platoon working on parks restoration, so national and local parks. One other in DC is hunger and nutrition. So basically any major issue you can think of, we've got veterans working on it across the country. And back to the one that you just talked about, I mean, this was in the poorest district of Washington, D.C., and this is just south of D.C. We chose to work in a middle school. It's the largest middle school in the poorest district. And as you saw, Jeremy, there's just a ton of work that needs to be done.
Oh, yeah.
They just don't have a lot of resources. And we came to them and to the principal and we said, hey, we've got 300 veterans here that want to make a difference, that want to revitalize and revamp the school, and we want to do it in 4 hours. And he thought that I was crazy. But what he didn't know is that the work ethic and the skills that we gained in the military would pretty much trump any sort of project work you can think of. And so that Saturday that we worked together, we had 300 volunteers, mostly veterans, but we had community leaders out. We had the principal and teachers and students. We had artists from the Veterans Artist Program, and it just changed the entire feeling of the school. We painted, what was it, like 30,000 square feet of indoor space.
Yeah, it was insane.
I think it was one of the largest projects we've had. We were pretty ambitious.
You had flower gardens going on outside, and
yeah, flower gardens. We redid the basketball court. There was a park that we completely cleaned out, and there's other things. Oh, we even rebuilt the library downstairs.
And one of the things that I noticed during that project is that it felt very much like I was back in the military. You had these little groups of people that were taking orders, and they were just jumping right on it. There wasn't any questions asked like, hey, I want you to paint this over here. There wasn't what you normally would see in the civilian world is, well, I don't think we should paint that. Maybe we should do this. Maybe we should do that. It was just, I need you to do this. And they jumped on it and did it. And throughout the whole day, like there was this incredible feeling of camaraderie. People were cheering each other on and, jumping in. If somebody finished a job early, they would jump into another group and try to help their group out. And it just ran like such a fine-tuned machine. It was incredible to watch.
Yeah, non-veterans are always impressed by kind of what you just described, but we see it as a given. Like that's just what we do. And so that was part of the Hart Middle School project. What was also neat was just having the murals that we redid that you were a part of and that your team was a part of. And that added a little extra, specialness to it. And there's a great video out there on the Mental Health channel, which covers the entire project at Hart Middle School. So if you Google "The Mission Continues" and the Mental Health channel, it should come up, and you'll see the really cool artwork that we were able to add to the school, and which to this day the kids just love.
And I will be sure to put a link to that in the show notes so everybody can go into that page and see that video.
Nice.
In fact, I am looking forward to watching it myself.
Yeah, so the Hart Middle School project, it's just an example of basically every weekend what veterans are doing across the country. And what I want to see, what I would love to see, and I'm sure you would too, is that if we get tens of thousands of veterans on a regular basis working on the most important issues in our communities, then people across the country just can't avoid changing the way they think about us. They're not going to see us as damaged. They're not going to see us as, poor veterans need a handout. They're going to say, hey, did you see what the group of veterans just did to our local park last week and how they built it up? Or, hey, our school hasn't been touched in 10 years. We haven't done any work on it. This group of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans came in. Aren't they amazing leaders and assets? We have to build our legacy. And this is one thing that we tell the fellows, which is another program that we have at the Mission Continues, which is an individual program that places veterans in nonprofits for 6 months as leaders all over the country. Part of their initial training, we call orientation, I talked to them about what our legacy could be as veterans, as the post 9/11 veterans, those of us who have served after 9/11 in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we say there's 3 things. One, that we could be the group of veterans that are seen as messed up, as damaged, as suffering from PTSD, from suicide, from traumatic brain injury, and we just didn't adjust, and had severe wounds as well. That's one way that our legacy could be seen. Another way is because we're only 1% of the population. We're a small group, and we could totally be forgotten. In the next 20 years, something else can happen that people are focusing their attention on. We can kind of fade into the different jobs around the country that we're focused on, and we kind of just disappear. So we can be the group of veterans that's just forgotten. It has happened in our nation's history. Or what we think is the third approach, and what we're working towards, is we can be seen as the group of veterans that came home and define what it means to serve.
Right.
And because we're only 1% of the population, and because we, suffered from trauma, it's even greater that what we did when we came home was lead and serve. And it just proves that you can go through trauma, you can be a little messed up, and you could be a small percentage of the population, but you can make a tremendous difference in our world, and you can be leaders, and you can be assets, and you can be someone that the next generation looks up to, just like I did my grandfather, I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, as someone that I wanted to emulate. And that's our job. And in order to do that, we can't sit still. We need to mobilize. We need to get tens of thousands of veterans doing service in our communities on a regular basis.
Absolutely. That leads me to my next question. Who should be joining up with the Mission Continues? Is there a specific type of veteran that you're looking for? Is it just anybody, or how does that work?
Yeah, any veteran who wants to continue their service, which, like I said, could be 90% of the population, should be involved in some way at the Mission Continues, whether it's through the Service Platoons or through the fellowship program, which is geared towards those who have a little bit more time to invest in working in a nonprofit for 6 months. But if you're in the National Guard, if you're in the reserves, even if you're in active duty and you want to start finding ways to serve not only our nation overseas, but you want to serve in the communities where you're stationed or where you live, we hope to have service platoons if they're not there already, but you should be joining them. If you're in one of the major cities, basically any major city in the U.S., you should join our service platoons. And we need you, and we need your leadership.
If you're, I don't know, maybe somebody who just got out of the military, they just retired from the Air Force, maybe you're sitting in Tucson, maybe, you happen to be my brother, this might be for you.
Yeah, exactly. And there's different ways to get involved. All of us are looking for jobs or going to school, so we have various, amount of time available. But if you want to just come out on the weekends and serve, I guarantee it'll be worth your time. Not only, do we need it, does our community need it, but you'll feel better, you'll be more connected because of it. The research on serving in your community has been out there for many years, and there's a lot of benefits to it. And it's even stronger when you're serving side by side with veterans. If you want to be in a leadership role and you want to kind of prove yourself, we've got roles of squad leaders and platoon leaders. Platoon leader kind of being the person that runs the show. But we've got a lot of ways to get involved. You've got social media expertise. If you're in a PsyOps, we need your help. If you're the operations type, the platoons need your help. If you're someone who's really great at networking and bringing in community leaders, then we need your help. So there's a lot of ways to get involved.
Outstanding. One last question before we get into the final 3. What do you see for the future of the mission continues?
I think the future for the mission continues is aligned with the future for this generation of veterans, and I think it's right. But we've got a lot of work to do. We need to mobilize and organize, and if veterans are coming together and take action, which I know we can, to continue to serve in all of the communities which we end up in, then I can foresee, and our organization can foresee, in the next 5 to 10 years, 100,000 veterans, and we're only, there's 5 million of us, so that doesn't seem to be that out of question. But 100,000 veterans doing service on a regular basis as a team across the country, and that's what we think that we need in order to really change the conversation, in order to inspire the next generation to not only serve in the military, but to see our country as something worthy and valuable of serving. And so that's our goal. We want to get a majority of veterans who come back from Iraq and Afghanistan continuing their service through not just the mission continues, but there's other avenues too.
Outstanding. All right, and now for the final 3. Aaron, are you ready?
I don't know. I think I am.
Okay. Who would you like to hear on a future episode of Veteran Resource Podcast?
Nice. I think, actually, I love what you're doing, and you're highlighting, the best veterans nonprofits out there, those who are really making a difference, especially given that there's, 40,000 different organizations that claim to work with veterans. There's a lot of noise, but really there's only a handful of organizations now that are doing a wonderful job with this generation of veterans. And one of the organizations that we work with on a regular basis, who are doing work in the communities, who are mobilizing similar to us, and we have a great overlap of membership, is Team Red, White, and Blue. So, I'd love to see, if you haven't already, just, bring them on. Blaine or Mike Irwin, their leadership, they're doing really awesome work.
Outstanding. I will definitely be in contact with them. Okay, question number 2. What upcoming project has you fired up right now?
Nice. So one of the things that I'm actually working on today, and will be working on for the next month, I mentioned earlier on that we have a platoon working on neighborhood beautification and the arts. And this is in the Bronx. So we have a Bronx service platoon that launched this year, sponsored by Guggenheim Partners, is very active in the Bronx. And we work closely with a nonprofit called Dream Yard, who brings arts education to low-income students who otherwise really wouldn't have access to arts education. And we're working on May 15th and May 16th in the poorest district of the Bronx, which happens to be the poorest district of New York City. And we're working on low-income housing development and building solar panel rooftops.
Wow.
Veterans from the service platoon will be installing this, it's called Cool Roofs, that this organization called Sustainable South Bronx developed. And we put in these cool roofs on top of low-income housing units. And it's designed in a way that if you look at it from a top, it creates this really beautiful landscape. It's an artistic landscape. And so we're going to try to bring in Google Earth and look at it from above, maybe get a drone on top, kind of do a before and after. But the goal of the service platoon in the Bronx, these are all teams of veterans that are from the Bronx and from New York City, is to build a sense of pride in the poorest area of New York City. And they're doing that through this arts installation, which has, as we kind of call it, like a quadruple bottom line. We're helping the community. We're doing it through an environmental, kind of friendly way, through solar panels. And in an artistic way, we're building pride in the community, and veterans are doing it.
Nice.
So this is on May 15th and 16th. Anyone in New York City should come out and join us, and you'll meet members from the Mission Continues Bronx Platoon.
Very cool. Very cool. I might have to try to break out there for that one.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. Come on up.
Okay, question number 3. This is the brain stretcher. If you woke up tomorrow, you found out that somebody made an anonymous donation of $10 million to your organization, what would you do with the money?
That would be wonderful. I'd love for that to happen. I'm sure many of us Mission Continues would, especially those who are working on fundraising, which is not easy, of course. I mean, I mentioned our goal of getting 100,000 veterans doing service on a regular basis. Every day I get emails from veterans who are in cities where we just haven't been able to focus because of lack of resources and just the requirements that it takes to launch a service platoon as a growing nonprofit. And some of the emails come from places in upstate New York or in West Virginia or in Idaho, South Dakota, Montana, in places where you're not going to end up on a top 50 list of population or cities in the country, or where corporate headquarters are, or top media markets are. And most veterans nonprofits don't end up kind of in those areas. And every time someone reached out to us and says, I want to start a service platoon, I've got veterans that are ready to go, we just need your support. It really sucks. It pulls at your heartstrings that we just can't do anything about it. And money doesn't solve everything. You have to grow as a nonprofit, but it certainly would help to get us from where we are now at 45 platoons to hundreds of platoons. I think we could probably get there a lot quicker with $10 million of resources.
Outstanding. Well, listeners, if there's any of you out there that have an extra $10 million and you're looking for a good place to put it, the Mission Continues is already doing some amazing things without it, but you just heard how much more they can do with it. So make sure that you get in touch with them, and Aaron will be glad to receive that $10 million from you.
Yeah, and it's not only are you helping veterans, but you're helping the communities in which they're working, because they're going to get stuff done.
Outstanding. And Aaron, for the person out there with the $10 million or anybody else that wants to get in contact with the Mission Continues, how can they do that?
Yeah, there's a number of ways. Of course, our website is www.missioncontinues.org. But our Twitter page is Mission Continues without an S. And you'll also be able to find the Mission Continues on Facebook. And if you search for your city, if you're in one of the top kind of major cities in the country, you'll probably find a service platoon on Facebook. But website's probably the best way to find it too.
Great. And I'll make sure that I put links to all of those in the show notes as well.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you so much for this interview, Aaron. This has been really great talking to you today about the Mission Continues.
No, it's my pleasure, and I hope you and I get to work on another really meaningful project with a group of veterans soon.
I absolutely do too. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you are interested in getting involved with the Mission Continues or just finding out more about them, you can head over to the show notes page at veteranpodcast.com/008. And I'm going to have all of the links and more information about Aaron up there, and you'll be able to get connected right away. Thank you so much for tuning in today. As you can tell from the intro and the outro here, my voice is a little bit scratchy. Here in Maryland, around this time of year, we get the pollen, which really does a number on my voice. But thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this great episode, and I'll see you in episode 9.